most important thing for a regulator is to check our reports to be able to understand if the process is running well or not. For this, we also have to define KPIs for each process. So this is kind of a commitment to what we want to achieve on a monthly or quarterly basis. So if we don't do this, then the regulator would have a problem because you committed to something and you don't do it. So that's why KPI definition is also very, let's say, sensitive. So you
it's difficult.
Yeah, because you really have to. As a data analyst, you also need to manage your stakeholders a lot because some of them are like, yeah, I want 20 KPIs. I want to see all of them in my report. But then how many of them are you sure you will be compliant with? Like 2 maybe. But then if you're not compliant with 80% of your KPIs, it's a disaster. So even though you want to see this in your report, it shouldn't be your KPI. So basically they're looking at which framework you're using, which reports are you making, and how complete they are. Because if you have like a report with one graph that shows super high level things that don't make much sense, of course they would have, they would not basically trust you and they would want to dive deeper. So basically that's the way they look at us. And as I said before, also you have to have this frozen version of everything so that you can't change it afterwards and make it nicer, update some numbers and so on. So you have to be really, you have consistent, exactly, yeah. So that's why also if you decide to completely change how you calculate something, you have to be very explicit about why you did it, how you did it, and so on, because they look at everything basically.
I never thought of that, but going back on what you said, I really like that policy. If you decide that you want a KPI, you immediately become responsible of making sure this thing constantly goes up. That will change a lot because a lot of people just like give me every number that seems important and put it in the same view, and we're gonna stare at it every morning.
Yeah, that's not entirely true that they always wanted to grow. The thing is that you have to be at the threshold or higher. So because with some things it's really hard to grow actually. Well, it's of course everybody always wants to be at the 100%, but usually if you're always at the 100%, it means you don't have a good KPI or something is wrong with your data. So it's good to be at like. For example, if the KPI is at 80%, it's perfect to be at 90% or 95%. But if you're at the 100, it's already very suspicious, I would say.
You know, I was not expecting we were going to talk about this, but I really like the topic of KPIs. So maybe, do you have some ideas on how to make a good KPI?
Yeah, actually, the thing is that as a data analyst, also as a process writer, I had to talk to lots of process owners in IT, and basically my task was just go to this person and ask them what exactly their KPIs should be and come back. And that never works like this because they never know what they want. They never know what should be KPI. Some people, as I said, they're super enthusiastic. They want to have everything in their KPIs, and other people are exactly the opposite. I actually have such stakeholders right now. They are like really afraid to take to like sign under specific KPI, especially if a process is new and it's only started. But you have to have KPI if you have a process. So basically you have to really talk to them and to explain them what is the good approach. And we usually are suggesting to have of course, reasonable KPI. So there is no question that you have like 10 stages in the process and you have a KPI that analyzes the first stage and nothing else. That is already not a good sign. But basically some generic KPIs that would show that the process is running well. So, for example, for incident management process, which is very important in fintech, of course, because if something is wrong with the clients not being able to trade, you can get a fine, you can get all kinds of regulatory not nice things. The KPIs that are considered good are basically response time, so how fast the incident gets picked up by the IT, and the second is resolution time, which is basically everything that you need. like there are things in between that you want to look at to understand the process better. But in terms of the key performance indicators, like it's really all that you need. Like how fast is your incident getting solved, and how fast their reaction is. So
I'm hearing a mix of things. Sometimes stakeholders want a lot of KPIs and they don't really know what exactly they want. But what I understand also now from what you said is sometimes the KPIs are super easy because they are determined by the situation, by the framework, by whatever it is.
yeah. There is no contradiction there actually, because it's the first one, so that the people want a lot of KPIs or no KPIs at all. It's more like psychological, and it depends a lot on the person. And the second thing, that you can have a couple of them and it's enough. It's basically a fact. So you have to be really careful, because you know it will be audited, and it's okay to breach them sometimes. It's perfectly fine. It's even good because it shows that your process is live, that you are not perfect and you know about it and you look at it. So it's really great, but you shouldn't breach it every month. That would be a disaster. So basically just have a couple of good KPIs. Of course, it depends on the process, but for my experience with IT processes, a couple, 3, 4 KPIs is enough. And it's not the whole report. Of course, there are more analytics there, but this is something that you commit to, basically, as a, not you, but the process owner commits to, basically.
I do have one hot take regarding KPIs, and that is you should always look at the way that your KPIs are correlated with each other. Just to give you a very practical example, if you sell something and your KPIs is maybe like revenue, number of customers, customer satisfaction, it should be very important that all of those 3 are correlated and they go up at the same time, or inversely correlated. Like when this one, like for example, when customer satisfaction and sales go up, it should never be at the expense of a number of complaints increasing. Because quite often, if you don't check the correlation, people are just going to hack their way into like raising a number at the expense of all sorts of other things. Typical example was you can increase the revenue quite a lot, but making your employees miserable. But that's also something that nobody wants.
Yeah, I really love this thought and this idea that, that's also kind of a danger of being in regulatory requirements and working on KPIs, that you just get obsessed with the numbers and then you forget about the other things, like you said, client happiness, or for example, employee happiness, which is also super important. So you can have like 100% resolution time of all the incidents, but maybe your incident management team is dying because they have like 12 hours of work every day. So that's why it's also important to look at other things, for sure. And your KPIs need to be smart and not just showing 1 or 2 numbers that are too generic, basically, and not showing the whole picture.
Yeah, and it's also important to think of KPIs as a system. In order for a number to go up or down, you need some input. And if you're already thinking ahead and you're aware this number is going to go up because we're going to spend an insane amount of money in marketing, or this number is going to go up because we're going to force people to work 70 hours a week, whatever it is, you should know where let's say the input is coming from for those numbers to go up. If you're just kind of clueless and just hoping for the numbers to go up, they might accidentally go up, but at the expense of something that you really don't want to. So being proactive is, to me, also very important.
Yeah, for sure. And I think maybe it's also important to, what we do usually, adding an explanation to some things that go wrong, for example. So if you have a team that is constantly failing all the KPIs in a terrible way, but you know there is only one person in there and he gets or she gets sick, goes on vacation, and just needs to do other things as well, then you have to specify it in the report. You can't just constantly blame this team as if they do something wrong. So the numbers are not always how to say it, a source of truth. Sometimes
They
you
don't tell
also
the whole story.
exactly, yeah. So it's
Yeah.
very important to know.
Interesting. Let me flip the question, and that is like, what is a bad KPI?
Oh, that's a good question. Um,
Anything you would consider this is definitely not a good practice, or this could lead to trouble?
yeah, I would say in terms of the processes, it's good to. I will switch to bed afterwards.
Yeah.
It's good to think about the purpose of the process. So even if the process has like 20 steps, but at the end there is one goal, it's better to have a KPI instead of 20 KPIs. Have one KPI that has that is showing them, basically whether the goal was met. So I can give you actually an example. We had a bad KPI that we removed recently. So for incident management, we had a KPI that was showing a ratio between created incidents and solved, which sounds reasonable, and it's also, I think, used in other practices. But for us, we realized at some point that our response time is great and our resolution time is great. But for some reason, this ratio, we're failing it. And then basically we realized that there are factors, since we're analyzing data per month, there were factors that were affecting this KPI in a not fair way to the people who were working on the incidents. So for example, if on the last day of the month or several last days of the month,
Yes.
there were hundreds of incidents created and then they were resolved on the first day of the next month, you fail this KPI because you didn't resolve them within the same month. So that was really not right and not fair to the teams and to people who were responsible for these KPIs. So at the end, we just removed it, and because it was more fair, like this.
Yeah, a lot of people, including me when I started, are not aware that whenever you have a ratio, ratios are very dangerous if you plan to look at them, let's say, on a periodical basis. Like, how was the ratio this month, or how was the ratio this year? Because sometimes like you accidentally grab data of a previous period and you're comparing it with events that happened in this month. That's an example that you mentioned. Also, like how many deals we closed. Do you only count the deals that started this month, or the deals that started last month and got closed this one? And what is a fair system? The truth is, most of those fair systems that tend to be accurate are not very useful because it's data that already happened way too long ago. Like if a project started 3 months ago and it's only been closed now and you're reporting it now, then there is not too much to act upon. So it's very difficult to work with ratios over time.
Yeah, that's a good point. We learned it the hard way, but yeah, I totally agree with you.
Definitely. And okay, to be fair, well, after I asked the question, I also realized maybe it's not fair to say that there are bad KPIs, but rather that your selection process might not be optimal, like choosing the right KPIs.
Yeah, and I think it's important to be fair to the team that is behind these KPIs, because you can also put some completely unrealistic targets. Yeah, it's also bad actually. Another bad KPI. It's bad to put too high targets that you will not that you will not reach, but it's extremely hard to reach. So you don't want to push people all the way there, because from the regulatory perspective, it's they want to have reasonable numbers. They don't want to have crazy high. They don't want to have 100% perfect every process. They just want to see you're in control. You know what you're doing, and you have reasonable values, but you don't need to be at the 100%. So I think that's very important to understand what's good enough.
Yeah.
It's super important because you don't need to push your teams over all the crazy limits for basically no reason that will not make anyone happy. So
Yeah. I'll never forget when during one of my first jobs, there was this insane threshold, like this insane goal. And I just approached my manager and said, look, this is what you sold on your best day ever. In order for us to meet this deadline, this threshold, it has to be the best day ever every day until the end of the year. Otherwise, you're not going to meet that target. And that really like put it to perspective.
Yeah.
So maybe sometimes like we like to talk about ratios, but sometimes changing the perspective. Another one I really like, instead of talking about conversion rates, I like to explain like you need to show this advertisement to 48 people for one of them to click.
Mm-hmm.
This staying away from ratios is also interesting.
Mm-hmm. So you mean that you have to basically have a KPI that wouldn't expect every single person to click, but
no, it's so. For example, in the world of advertisement, it's very common that they report on the clicking rate or the number of people that open this is like a 48%.
mm-hmm.
And that's a ratio, and that's kind of okay. But that completely ignores like how many people are actually looking at this and how that looks in practical terms.
Oh, okay.
So if you instead report that like it cost us so much to get one person to click, and in general we need to show this to so many people for one of them to be interested.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, there's also something to really think about. Yeah,
So,
yeah.
but that's purely on how you present the KPI and how, especially like abstaining from ratios or looking for something else. Even maybe not per se ratios, but I also have seen companies that normalize their KPIs, and they want them always from 0 to 100.
Mm-hmm.
100 being like the best day ever and 0 being the worst day ever, and then like today we score a 58, and then they know it was a little bit better than average.
Mm-hmm.
Plenty to think about.
Yeah, yeah. You really have to consider a lot of dimensions while defining KPIs. It's not just like, oh, let's choose this number and go ahead.